Britain is the birthplace of modern capitalism. It is the home of the Industrial Revolution, and it was once called the workshop of the world. Politically and economically, it was for decades an island of stability in the capitalist world order. In the past years, however, we've seen a steady decline of British capitalism. Productivity has been flatlining, wages and living standards have been declining, the welfare state has been dismantled along with British industry, and we've seen a political establishment in crisis after crisis. In last week's local elections, this process reached a new peak where all of the pent-up contradictions revealed themselves in an explosive manner, which also marked the beginning of the end of the two-party system. My name is Hamid Alizadeh. I'm here with Niklas Albin Svensson, and this is Against the Stream. So, Niklas, local elections were a big shock to political Britain, where we saw the rise of Reform UK making a serious dent in these elections. What do you think about this? What do you think this reflects?
Well, we've seen. You can see actually, it's in a sense it was to be expected because we've seen opinion polls the way they've been turning over the last. Ever since Starmer was elected, really, since
last summer.
That's right. It's almost a year ago now. Not quite, but yeah. And we could see the opinion polls turning against Labour. Every new announcement the government makes pushes the polling numbers for Labour down another notch. And the beneficiary of this has not been the traditional Conservative Party, but Reform UK, which is like a new style of Conservative Party, or more like Trump rather than the old one.
Just before we continue, I'm just going to read out the facts. These were local elections in a limited amount of seats. There was also a couple of mayoral elections, and there was a by-election because there was a Labour MP who got into a fight. He beat up one of his constituents and then had to withdraw. So that seat was up for grabs again.
He was convicted, I think, of assault.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Now, there were 1,650 council seats at play, and Reform UK won 677 of these. That is a 41% of the seats. Although the vote they actually got was 31%, but we'll get back to that. They took control of over 10 counties, including Doncaster, which was previously Labour controlled, Durham, which we'll get to, which was Labour controlled for 100 years. It was the first council that Labour actually won over in 1919, and they lost control over it in 2019. It didn't have any kind of particular party control, but now the Reform is controlling it, and Labour got 4% of the vote. Then there were 8 former Tory strongholds: Derbyshire, Kent, Lancashire, Lincolnshire, Northamptonshire. I don't know if I'm saying this right. I'm not a proper Brit, even though I've lived here for 13 years now. Nottinghamshire, Staffordshire, West Northamptonshire.
Lancashire as well.
I didn't say that. Oh, yeah. And Lancashire. Reform UK got 31% of the vote. But really, they won in Greater Lincolnshire with 42% of the vote, and in Hull and East Yorkshire with 36% of the vote. And then there was this parliamentary by-election in Runcorn and Helsby, where Labour had a 14,000 vote majority last time around. This is a safe Labour seat, supposedly safe Labour seat. They won it with 52% of the vote last summer. And this time around, Reform won by a margin of 6 votes. I think it's around 14,000 against 14,000 thereabout. But it's with 6 votes more than Labour. The most interesting part is, I would say, it is almost not even reform. It is quite interesting, but the point was that this was the biggest setback in elections. Although this was a snapshot because it was only a partial part of the local councils in Britain, but it was a very big thing because, as far as I understand, this was the first time where the two major establishment parties didn't get more than 50% of the vote combined. The Tories went down, got 319 councillors elected, but they were down 677, which is incidentally the exact same amount that Farage got. Labour got 98 councillors, they were down 189. So almost 65% decline for both of the establishment parties. And what we also saw was a massive, fragmentation, which meant that lots of votes going to all sorts of different parties and independents and so on. Again, a break with the old two-party system in effect, which also meant that they could gain 41%, the Labour Reform could gain 41% of the seats with only 31% of the vote.
I mean, you can look at, if you look at the Greens, for example, they, in this election, they won almost as many councillors as Labour.
Yeah.
With them on 79, whereas Labour got 98.
Yes.
And the Liberal Democrats are
they came
second biggest, and they gained 163 councillors, and Labour lost 187. Now, like, the figures match now. Undoubtedly, some of the Liberal Democrat gains came from Conservative, and some of the Reform came from Labour.
Yeah.
But I think, in general speaking, the Liberal Democrats have nicked. Well, actually, to be honest, they probably took from both Labour and the Conservatives. And you now have like basically 5 parties who are vying for a significant share of the councillors. MPs is a little bit of a different story, but where it's more like 3, or 4.
Yeah.
But
in reality, this is an earthquake. This is a political earthquake, which anticipates future developments. Obviously, we might see slightly different voting patterns, and depending on how reform actually carry themselves in these local councils, we might see slight changes. But the most important thing is the two-party system is now in a terminal crisis, is gone for now. Reform is officially the main opposition party. With the collapse of the Tories, the collapse of the vote and support for the Tories, Reform appears to be officially the main opposition party. Which means what? Which means that the British ruling class is losing control. This is what we've been saying for a number of years, but if you remember back when Boris Johnson was doing his Brexit thing, we said that they lost control over the Tory party. But they still had some influence within the Tory party. But Reform is not the party of the British ruling class. The Labour right wing is a direct agent of the British capitalist class. But they are also they're hemorrhaging.
Yeah.
And the Tories, who are supposed to be the opposition party, which are normally the ones who would be gaining in an election after let's say local elections after general elections, they lost even more, and they're just.
Well, Kemi Badenoch was supposed to be from the sort of Johnson wing of the Conservative Party.
Yes.
But you can see here that doesn't.
Just to say, for people who don't know, Kemi Badenoch is the leader of the Tory party. I'm saying this because someone mentioned her name a couple of weeks ago, and I said, "Who is that?"
Yeah.
This is how known and popular.
Well, she's the official leader of the opposition in Parliament, but most people, in reality, think of Nigel Farage now as being basically as you say, the leader of the opposition. That he's Labour's main challenge in the next election.
Yeah.
And the Conservatives are being sidelined, and you can see that in these results. Clearly, the second party now, actually the first party, is becoming the Reform, and Labour is trying to hang on there as the second party.
Yes.
And the Conservatives are being pushed completely sidelined by the whole process.
Yes. There's one more party which is not mentioned, which is the neither party. Normally, I mean, participation in local elections is not very high, traditionally in any case. But there is a distinct sense of hatred towards all of them. Even the ones, people who vote reform, are not convinced necessarily. A big part of them are not convinced by reform, but they see it as more of a protest vote. And in fact, the Guardian was quoting someone for saying, this is a seasoned Labour campaigner who said, "I've never seen so many drawings of penises."
On the ballot papers.
On the ballot papers. Yes. So what does that tell you? That is the attitude. This is not people who just stay home because they had enough of established. This is people who actually go, take the time to stand in line to these elections, which are ridiculous. You know, they have ridiculous choices in front of them, but still manage to get themselves to go and vote in order to show their dissatisfaction with this. That's a warning sign.
But it's also continuing a trend, right?
Yeah.
So Labour last year, they got 9.7 million votes. In the supposedly disastrous election of 2019, they got 10.2 million votes.
That's when Jeremy Corbyn was.
That's right. When Jeremy Corbyn, the last election with Jeremy Corbyn as the leader,
how many did they get?
10.3 million votes, right? Yeah. So this is the none of the above is
Voters.
gaining ground, right?
Yes.
Not turning up, or basically dissatisfied people either do not turn up or they vote now turning and going out and voting for reform.
Yeah. Now, our task obviously is not just to look at the figures, but it's a question of what is actually happening here. Now, I found a series of quotes. This one is from The Guardian. This is just interviews with different people. This one is from The Guardian. It says, "I don't see any point in any of them. They really are all horrible. Once they've been voted in, they forget about us." There was a Tommy Young, 59-year-old, someone that Guardian spoke with. There's another person. He works for a polling company called More in Common. His name is Luke Trill. On Twitter, he posted a series of observations, quotes from people that he had been, questioning for their research, right? So focus groups was what they've been doing. He wrote, "Deep disillusionment with the status quo, anger at 14 years of Tories, and frustration with the start of the Labour government." That's how he summed it up. He said that voters who are unsure about Farage and reform have felt that, quote, "they may as well roll the dice to get the change they've been asking for." Then he wrote again. This was to The Guardian. Here's him on Twitter. He says, We're just in the car back from focus groups this week in Beverley, Hull, Scunthorpe, and Peterborough, and without doubt, the disillusionment was the worst I've heard. In every group, it was anger, despondency, or misery about the state of Britain that doesn't feel sustainable. I'm going to read out a couple of his, because I think they're quite indicative. One, the way Starmer speaks, the way it comes across when he's interviewed, the way he speaks about the winter fuel allowance, I think he's a disgrace. I think he's ruthless. I don't know what the difference is between them and the Tories, to be honest with you. This is about the cuts to the winter fuel allowance for elderly and for
and those who are not familiar with British conditions, basically in Britain pensions are pitifully small. They're very, very low, and the way that it's made up a difference then is by various types of benefits, like for example the winter fuel allowance, which is meant to help pensioners basically keeping their houses warm in the winter. And as you know, if they don't do that, then there's many pensioners who die every year as a result of cold homes. And so this was meant as an attempt to alleviate for the poorest, to just give them a little bit of money to keep their homes warm during the winter. And that's what in the autumn they cut.
That was the first major policy of the Labour government, or one of the first major ones.
Well, that and sending money to Ukraine, I think.
Exactly. And then we had afterwards the personal independence payments, which are benefits to disabled people, which is also looking to be cut. I don't know if they've passed it yet. They're going to pass it later.
They are discussing it. It's about they're basically £5 billion worth of cuts to to the welfare bill. In the amount they're cutting from the disabled people is even higher. Maybe even as high as 10 billion. Which is very similar to what the Conservatives did when they came in 2010, 2011.
If anything, maybe it's a bit higher though, the actual figures. But here is a mechanic from Hull. He says they're targeting the wrong people, pensioners and the disabled. It seems to be the groups that can't fight back. And maybe they have a point. Maybe that is what they're going for.
That's what they're doing.
People who have a difficulty speaking up.
They're hoping basically that people don't care about disabled people, don't care about pensioners because it doesn't affect them. And therefore they're attacking them, thinking that, we can get away with it. As opposed to attacking like every workers across the board, right?
The BBC chief political correspondent, Henry Zeffman, wrote on Twitter after the results. He says, I was talking to one Labour campaigner who was leaving. They said to me on every door it was the same story: winter fuel and benefit cuts. So these are Labour campaigners going door to door, trying to canvass people to vote for Labour.
I mean, some of these areas as well that you mentioned, like for example Durham, these are very impoverished areas. These are former mining towns and so on in that particular region. Old former industrial areas and some of the others, I think some of the other areas which there were elections. And so these are places where, because there's no other, the employment is lacking. There's people working minimum wage or part-time and so on. And so the benefits is a way for them of keeping themselves alive, basically. And so you're attacking these things. You're basically, I saw there was some poll or some investigation that someone made that the tax on the benefits is like really attacking all the people that vote for Labour. And it used to be a slander on behalf of the Tories. Oh, it's all these people. Labour just supplied these people with benefits, so they will vote for them. I mean, it's obviously not true, because it just so happens that the poor people tended to vote for Labour because of the welfare state and the attachment to the welfare state and so on. But it's precisely the people now being attacked by the Labour government.
It's the working class, and Labour has always been seen traditionally as the party of the working class. It's the party of the unions. It's party of the NHS, the welfare state. It's the party that was supposed to represent the working class. And now the actual policies that it's carrying out is the most vicious and reactionary and right-wing attacks against the working class. Here is a Guardian poll of the reasons why people did not vote Labour, right? Number one, remove the winter fuel allowance. Number two, so they just polled everyone. And this is what people said. Number two, not reduced cost of living. So that's the cost of living. Not improved public services. Broken too many promises. Not stood up to the rich and powerful. Raised taxes too much at the budget. Mishandled the economy generally. And last, failed to control immigration. Now, this is something that's come up, and we'll discuss it a bit further on. But this whole, if you talk with a lot of people on the left, so-called left, people who see themselves as leftist, it's and a lot of the liberal media, it's all about the rise of racism and the rise. But here, this is black on white, the real situation. The actual racism or immigration, which is not entirely about racism for the way that people see it. immigration was number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the list of reasons why people did not vote Labour. All of the other ones were class questions and economic questions related to living standards and so on and so forth.
I also found, there's an organization called Hope Not Hate, whose politics is very wishy-washy. Usually they're not very strong at all. But actually they made an interesting poll.
Yeah.
And it says that they talk about the coalition of pessimism. I think this is quite... it's not the right way of posing it, but anyway, what they say is that voters from across the political spectrum who indicated they will vote for Reform UK who are united by feeling that the country isn't going in the right direction. And then they mention things like there are some, obviously, in 2024, the average Reform UK voter had strong anti-immigration views, but those who have begun to support the parties instead have far more diverse views. This includes a sizable groups who are actually quite positive towards the benefits of immigration and multiculturalism, but increasingly feel the main parties have failed and it is time for something new. So actually, although their answer to what to do about this leaves something to be decided, actually they make the same point. They make the correct point.
Yeah. This is a class question. Just to stay with Labour for a moment, it's really damning that they lose a seat like Durham. Obviously, they actually lost it really 6 years ago in 2019, but that they've been reduced to how many? What was the figure? You had the figures here. Do you have the Durham figure?
No.
4% of the vote. Which is a seat they've been holding for 100 years. This is the council which organizes Durham Miners' Gala.
Yeah.
Which is a festival of the workers' movement, the labor movement. Trade unionists and left-wing activists from all over Britain come in the tens and hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And now it's going to be organized by a reform-held council.
Yeah.
This is a damning indictment of the Labour government and the policies that Labour have been carrying out for the past many years, especially the Labour right wing.
Yeah.
And what's Starmer's response to all of this?
I don't know.
We need to move faster.
Yeah.
We need to move faster.
We need more change.
We need more change.
Yeah.
Someone was saying, who was it? I was just reading it out to you before this program. Someone was saying, because they have this thing called a plan for change.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what plan for change. But obviously, the plan for change is what cuts, austerity, rationalization, and so someone's saying we should have a change of plans rather than a plan of.
So Labour MP, anonymous Labour MP, was it?
Yes, it was. No, it wasn't an anonymous one. It was a Labour MP on the left of the party. The Starmer's response has been almost aloof. I haven't really seen him. He's we need to move faster. We need to communicate. It's all about not communicating the important benefits that people get from our policies, because we're making it more attractive to work. You see, people who are disabled and who are pensioners who are freezing in the winter, it's because we're not giving them the opportunity to work.
Yeah,
that's the problem. Don't you see that?
It's like the whole thing is. What I say, there's two sides. Well, it's just like Starmer himself, right? He's a very unattractive politician, very wooden and all these things, and thus comes across terribly. But he became the leader of the Labour Party because he had one thing, and that was that he had been camouflaged inside the Corbyn administration, and he come out pretending to be someone who could continue the legacy of Corbyn. That was why he stood that's why he stood in the leadership election. It was a complete barefaced lie.
Yeah.
As you could see at the time, but
not
everyone saw it, right? Yeah. There was a lot of people who were taken in by it and voted for him. And as a result, and then obviously those 10 pledges they famously stood on, he abandoned all of them. So when they say about, he abandons, he lies about what he stands for, he abandons his pledges and so on. Yeah, everything he has, every platform he's ever stood on, he's then backtracked on.
Yeah.
And you can see that even in this election, they hardly said anything. But they still managed to go back on the promises they made in this election. I can't remember which one. But it was one of these policies where they specifically said they wouldn't do, and then they went ahead and did it. I think it might be the benefits cuts. I'm not. I think they said they wouldn't go ahead with Tory reforms on personal independence payments.
Yes.
And then they not only went ahead with them, but they made them worse. It was worse than the proposal that came out of the Tories. And in fact, there was a Tory minister, Tory shadow minister, as they call them, a spokesperson for the Tory party, who said that but obviously you have to take what he says with a pinch of salt. But he was saying that he was opposing the disability cuts, and the Tories was opposing it. He said, we made a mistake back in 2011 or 2012, whenever it was they launched this first round of attacks against disabled people. And he said we made a mistake, a heartless policy at that time, right? And now he was basically saying the government is making the same mistake. And there was a difference, like under Johnson, under Sunak, there was a slight difference. Although Sunak was preparing another wave of attacks against disabled, but it's absolutely astonishing the horrific consequences these have, because these are people who can't work. Mm-hmm. That's the joke. He says some of them do work. It's not. It's the PIP in particular, the personal independence payments, is for people who struggle.
There's a gradation, isn't there?
No, there's people struggle with their daily life, right?
Yeah.
So you're meant to be able to get it if you're in work, but the truth is, like the overwhelming majority of people who can't work who are getting this, and so Starmer is basically we're paying these people who can't, it's things like you can't cook your own food, you can't go to the toilet properly and so on, these kind of problems that you have.
Yes.
And you're supposed to go work, but not just go work in, a normal situation, but in the labor market of today, when employers do not give... they're not like known for making lots of adjustments for people. Like, disabled people can work if you give the right adjustments, but employers aren't interested in that. They want cheap workers. They don't want workers who are going to cost them extra money. So the whole thing is an extremely cynical game on the part of him and the Labour cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, the PIP payments, according to The Guardian, the Department of Work and Pensions estimates that 3.2 million families will lose out. This is important extra income for people who most of whom are already under enormous pressure. Let's just not forget that we've already had the cost of living crisis. We've had, since 2008, declining wages, rents skyrocketing, general instability, the whole system falling apart on every level. And these are just piling up on top of that. So they estimate that there is an internal Department of Work and Pensions forecast that the Guardian has got their fingers on, which already projected that 250,000 people are going to become poor, are going to be driven into poverty due to recent cuts. This is before these PIP cuts, right? 250,000 people are already going to go under the poverty line. And now with the PIP cuts, another 700,000 families are going to be categorized as relatively poor after these cuts. And just to say the brutality, because what they're saying, they're raising the threshold. There's like a grading system of a certain amount of points you can get, and they're raising it. So you have to get above 4 points to be able to get this. But under 4 points includes people who cannot wash themselves below the waist. That is a very, very inhuman position to be in, and a very debilitating position. And yet you say, oh no, you're not it's because you're not working. You're not proactive enough in the job market. I mean, it's lunacy. This is the most reactionary, right-wing policies.
Yeah.
This is outflanking the Tories in many ways. But I don't know if you have anything more to say to this, because there's an article in the Financial Times.
Just a question of poverty. I don't know if you wanted to.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So on poverty, right? Just to give people an idea, it's also not like poverty in Britain is bad, but it's getting worse and it's getting rapidly worse. For example, on children, 3.8 million people, including 1 million children, experienced destitution in 2022, unable to afford basic essentials.
Yeah.
This figure has more than doubled since 2017. So we're talking about like 7 years, right?
Yeah.
And, or 8 years. No, sorry, 5 years. Yeah. To 2017 to 2022. We've gone from 1.9 million people to 3.8 million people who cannot afford the basic essentials in life, right?
Yeah.
And this is obviously parcel of the previous government, conservative government, who did this, but also the poverty wages, the rises in rent, and all these things that you were talking about that basically created this situation.
Yeah. Starmer says that you should be in work. The problem is that people are not in work, don't have jobs, are not working. According to the TUC, they published a report in January. 1 in 6 workers, 17% of workers, skipped a meal in the past 3 months because they didn't have enough money. These are people who are already in work.
Yeah.
And so that means hunger beginning to become, this is not something you're used to. This is obviously something in Africa and Asia, Middle East, less advanced countries. This is obviously endemic amongst the working class. But this is now becoming right to the core of European capitalism, beginning to become an endemic.
Plenty from, nurses, lots of public sector workers and so on who were, you hear stories of them going to food banks, basically where they could get free food by charities.
Yeah.
There was these conservative ministers. They were cutting ribbons, talking about, oh, isn't it great? We have this society where volunteering society where people come together to help each other out.
Yeah.
With us opening up food banks, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. There was an absolute explosion in the number of food banks in Britain under the Conservative government. Which has caused this, which was a result of this tremendous destitution that they created.
According to YouGov, they did a survey the week before Christmas. They asked 2,500 working adults. 10% of them said that they had skipped a meal every day or most days. That's how people live. This is the situation that's building up in Britain. It's a situation of desperation for millions of people, anger, hatred towards the establishment, towards the elite, towards the way that things are. There's a feeling that everything is falling apart. There's this another quote by this guy. He said, "I've actually given up on the system. If I'm being totally open and honest with you, nothing really changes ever. You go from one bunch of lying so's and so's to the next lot, it would seem. Even locally, it's almost, this is going to sound really extreme, but the country almost needs a coup d'etat, and it needs someone to almost come in and say, right, this is what we're doing, and you will conform. There's no proper leadership by anybody. Nobody likes any of the candidates. Nobody really trusts any of them. It's almost like we need the king to say, right, I'm in charge, and this is what we're doing." This is a sales manager in Bonn. Now, there is an element of how the middle class looks at this, but there's an element of the desperation as well. This is what a lot of this anger exists everywhere. If you're a sales manager, you're doing relatively well. You're not doing terribly. You're probably not going hungry. Probably.
No, probably not.
Probably.
I don't know.
But the pressure is relentless. And it's affecting all layers. And there's a ferment, there's an unprecedented ferment which Labour is not reflecting as the supposed representative of the working class. And in some ways, neither are the trade unions. In many ways,
Yeah.
there was an article in the Financial Times, very interesting article, which is called "How Nigel Farage Has Gained Ground with Trade Union Members," and he talks about the reform. So they interview this guy Howard Brown. He's a National Education Union trade union official who calls reform a far-right party. And he says, I found a lot of members voting reform. And he says, it's very worrying, but these are traditional working class communities. The rise of reform is something we can't ignore, and we need to have a narrative that combats their message. For them, it's all about narratives, you see.
Yeah.
We're just not communicating properly. Can't you see? It's not about the hunger and the pressures at the workplace and the falling apart of the country. It's the way we talk about it.
This reminds me of the Labour government when they claimed that people were just... that they just had a narrative about the NHS not working, but in reality it was working. And so it's just about convincing them that that the narrative that they had heard was wrong.
Yeah, I wonder where they would go if they have a life-threatening illness.
Yeah.
NHS or some other place. Then it continues. It says, Farage, a former metals trader and devotee of former Conservative Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, has in recent months been honing reform's pitch to appeal to the types of voters who make the TUC's membership at the heart of the Labour movement. He backed striking bin workers in Birmingham, turned up at British Steel's flagship site in Scunthorpe to call for the nationalisation of the steelmaker, and said Thames Water's investors and bondholders deserve to lose every single penny. Reform's deputy leader Richard Tice, who made millions in real estate, even appeared in the House of Commons wearing a trade union pin badge.
Yeah.
Obviously, this shows the opportunism and the demagogy of these guys. Yeah. But there is it's quite striking, isn't it? Here you have the Labour Party carrying out the most vicious cuts and attacks. And then you have reform. You remember they were saying Jeremy Corbyn shouldn't talk about nationalisation because it's going to alienate the working class.
That was the argument of the right wing of Labour Party.
In reality, we get to that, but Corbyn was actually gaining because of that.
Yeah.
If he was not gaining, it's because he wasn't doing that forcefully enough. But here you have reform. There's a bin strike in Birmingham. Birmingham City Council is basically bankrupt. And they've been attacking the bin workers. They wanted to reduce the wages of around 200 bin workers from £40,000 a year to 32. That's a significant decline in income. And the bin workers have been striking. There's tons and tons of bin rubbish piled up in Birmingham City. They've been striking since early March. That's 2 months. Almost 2 months, since the 11th of March. And against a Labour-led government. Sorry, a Labour-led council.
Yeah.
And with the Labour Party in powers adding to the cuts.
Yeah, but it's basically the council and the government together because because the council went bankrupt, they called in the commissioners. So the council is, although I think a lot of the councillors are supportive of it, but nonetheless, the council have been partially, basically don't have the power over their own affairs anymore. Yeah. But the Labour, I think, I can't remember when exactly commissioners were sent in. It might have been on the Conservative government.
Yeah.
But I know one of the commissioners is the former mayor of Tower Hamlets, who got booted out unceremoniously a couple of years ago, as he was a Labour mayor of Tower Hamlets, and he got beaten soundly in the elections. And he now is advising, partly after picking a fight with the trade unions, and he's now advising the council in Birmingham about how to carry out the cuts and obviously attack the unions in Birmingham.
In the most divisive manner.
Yeah.
Because one of the things is that we talked about it before. There's been a few years ago, the female council workers wages struggle against the council for equal pay.
Yeah.
And they won that. But that meant millions of pounds having to be spent to pay them the back wages of this unequal pay that they had received for years. Now, but back then, the female council workers were saying we should get the same wage as the bin workers.
Yeah.
And so now the council is attacking the bin workers, trying to basically pit women workers against male bin workers.
Yes, obviously these female workers facing wage discrimination on the grounds of being female, and they won the court case.
Yeah.
And then, so the council's solution to that problem is not to fight for sufficient funding to make sure that all the workers get paid a decent wage, but rather than to go and say, well, that means we must lower the wages of all the workers that are getting paid a decent wage already, or which is the bin workers among others, right? Who are getting paid more than the average.
And what does Farage do? He supports them. I don't think he's officially said, I support the strike. I couldn't find any statement, but maybe he has. But he went to Birmingham, he had a big rally, and he's refused to denounce the striking workers, which is seen by the workers as support.
He's making a show of that he's on the side, but he also opposed the cut to the winter fuel allowance, made a big noise about that, and not support it. They're not a bit unclear where they stand on the cuts to disability benefits, but I wouldn't be surprised if they came out against those cuts as well. Being in the kind of just like Trump is against some of the cuts, that there's a wing of the conservatives in the Republicans in the US who want to cut social spending, and Trump is holding them back because he leans on that layer, basically saying, no, look, I am in favor of you. It's obviously a lie, but nonetheless.
Obviously, but it is telling that Farage is putting these ideas forward, and we'll get to the left later on. But in Scunthorpe, there's British Steel. It's the last remaining kind of steelworks of that type, isn't it? And they're shutting it down, or it's close to shutting down. Farage has called for its nationalization again. Getting a massive echo on these things. What they mean by nationalization is another thing, but that's what he says.
It's also against the Chinese, just like the Thames Water, it's against Chinese investors, which is probably how he squares the circle, right? He doesn't say that, but it's probably how he squares the circle.
But the point is, what is people seeing in him?
Precisely.
That's what is so important for us. Yes, of course, we need to understand what is Nigel Farage himself, what he represents. And that is, he's a bourgeois. He's obviously a bourgeois. But what is it people see in him? And then in Thames Water, they said, oh, should we nationalize Thames Water? And the way nationalization has worked recently in Britain is that whenever some major company is going bust, the state comes in and bails out the investors, pays them the money, and then basically sorts out the company and then sells it back and privatizes it again for cheap. So it's just a way of funneling money to stockholders. With Thames Water, he says, I saw the video of it. It's quite firm. He says the shareholders and bondholders deserve to lose every penny they have. That is disgraceful what they've done. That company should be allowed to collapse, and then we start from scratch. Not meaning that the water supply in London should go bust. But that they should lose their money and then the state can take it over.
But this is how capitalism is meant to work, right? These companies they've been deliberately run into the ground, and now they're asking basically not they're raising the water bills. They're demanding raising the water, doubling the water bills of everyone in.
Myself included.
In Britain, to be honest. Because it's not just Thames Water, it's a bunch of other water companies as well. And they're all in trouble because they've all had the same model of basically asset stripping.
Just not doing anything.
No investment or minimal investment and massive payouts to shareholders. And then the companies
Yeah.
eventually they have to then carry out investment because the infrastructure is crumbling, and then they're demanding money from the people to pay their debts and whatever.
Incidentally, that is a very exact description of British capitalism.
Yeah.
We talked about it in the beginning of the show. Britain was the first major capitalist nation. There was a bourgeois revolution in the Netherlands before Britain, but it was in Britain that capitalism really took off.
Yeah.
Developed, and industry started developing. And you had, Trotsky says, the British ruling class used to plan in decades and centuries and continents. But now British capitalism has become utterly parasitic. It is asset stripping. It is gambling on the stock markets. It is stripping the welfare state, privatizing the NHS, destroying everything, undermining the whole of the infrastructure, and thereby also the social fabric of society. And
it's one of the few countries in the world, in the advanced capitalist world, right, where investment in industry for decades has been negative. i.e. they're not even replacing the machinery that breaks down, right, with time. But it's just basically the amount of machinery available to the
and you have the rise of the city of London, the banks, the stock markets, all the speculators becoming this huge parasitic outgrowth of the system. Although this is a natural development of the system, this is not something spectacular. But it's also been a part of what's created this complete disconnect between the elite, the ruling class, the capitalists, the big business, and the political establishment, the media. They all live in this bubble, the stock market bonanzas of, where you just elbow your way into one company, and whoever can strip it the first and the best and the crudest, they're the ones with the biggest. It's the hedge fund kind of corridors taking over political Britain, which on the other side sees the people who are seeing the country falling apart, and there's this incredible anger, but it's like it's not even coming through, because you see like interviews with Starmer about this election defeat. It's like they don't even get it. They don't understand it. They think, oh, okay, we can turn this around, and we'll just do. It's like it's not seeping in. They're incapable of understanding.
I think they got no understanding what life is like for no people. The same. They started their whole. We didn't mention, but they started their whole term in government by basically having a massive scandal about all the freebies they've been getting.
Yeah.
And they were like completely baffled that people were upset that they were getting like gifts of like £10,000 to replace their wardrobe.
Yeah.
And I think and there's like hairdressers appointments not hairdressers appointments. Sounds like we were thousands of pounds worth of makeup, clothes, and so on that Keir Starmer and his wife had been getting. Keir Starmer had been getting free football tickets. He's a Arsenal fan, apparently, and he'd be giving free football tickets for the VIP box and so on, which is like thousands of pounds each time, and it was just full of that. And they were they were acted. I think Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, the Minister of Finance, she had also been taking money, and they acted like and I think that was sort of genuine, that they didn't understand why people were upset, right?
Yeah.
But I think they were genuinely baffled by how upset people were with them. Yeah. And I think that really showed how out of touch they are and they have become. They do not understand anything. I remember that people were saying that about the Brexit referendum as well. Yeah. There are a lot of similarities of parallels with the Brexit referendum and the present situation. That these Labour MPs and so on, they would turn up and they just had no way of talking to people. They couldn't understand them. They couldn't talk to them when they were out campaigning for Remain in the European Union.
Yeah, and now they're completely incapable of understanding this thing. Also, for them, it doesn't really necessarily matter, because in business you have CEOs who are brought in to slash the workforce, become very unpopular, and then leave. That's what they do with their careers. And there are other CEOs that are brought in to do a bit more long term. They don't really care. It's a job for them. And it's the excitement maybe of gaining positions and doing. They don't think in the same long-term manner that British politicians used to think. I mean, they have certain pressures on them from the big bourgeois, from the banks, and to stabilize certain things, but it's not. It's like it's a self-devouring system in a way that's created this extreme short-termism, extreme financialization, extreme, move away from development of the productive forces, actual investment in industry, actual investment in things that develop society, like infrastructure and so on.
Ironically, Nigel Farage is one of the, and the people around him are very much the representative of the same thing, but they obviously opportunistically leaning in a different direction now. Particularly, I think after Trump's victory, they have they saw something. They smelled something and they were like, "Oh, this is a way of winning some votes."
Yeah, they're not maybe as tied into the present system as the other gang is. This is what the Financial Times actually comments. It says, "The fact that low-tax, bonfire of red tape, Doge fan Nigel Farage is now banging the drum for nationalizing the commanding heights of the economy is extremely telling." This is some think tank guy who's saying this. "Reform's growing strength in former mining areas such as County Durham and Nottinghamshire demonstrated that, quote, there is a big crossover in communities where trade unions have been strong. A senior figure of the Communication Workers Union, which has distanced itself from Labour under Starmer's leadership, added, the choice really is between Labour and reform in most workplaces." This is this should be a wake-up call to Labour leaders and trade union leaders who've been tail-ending the Labour leadership. The person added that the more classically left-wing positions being taken by Farage in recent months, including the call for nationalization of British Steel, had enamored some union members to reform. Farage's suggestion that failing water companies should be allowed to collapse had echoes of previous left-wing Labour leaders Jeremy Corbyn or France's Jean-Luc Mélenchon. "It's a breath," this is a quote, "it's a breath of fresh air, to be honest."
Yeah.
And this is a total damning indictment of the Labour Party and the whole of the left, the trade union movement, all of these people who are now screaming out about the far right. The far right is rising. Oh my God, the racism. What they're saying is people are too stupid. They worry about, they ignore all the talk about living standards, life getting harder and harder for people. And they're saying, oh, people are stupid and they're racist. That's why they vote reform. Just incidentally, the Birmingham rally that Farage organized, it does show something about what Farage really represents and what people see in him. Because he had 5,000 people there, and the Financial Times reported on this. He had 5,000 people there, and it was kind of rowdy. People were having a drink, and there was lots of shouting and cheering and hooing and hawing. And at one point he says, oh yes, the billionaires are even leaving the country. And people were saying, yeah, good riddance. Yeah, they were saying, yeah. And then he said, no, that's not a good thing. And then people started booing at him, saying, good riddance, just get rid of them. That's the real voice of the working class. They want to see the billionaires go.
Yeah.
They're angry at the establishment. They're angry at the elite. Yeah, Farage has seen a niche, a kind of an opportunity to tap into that anger. But obviously, he represents more than anything the bankers he just represents a different wing of them.
Yeah.
And coming to power, well, let's see if he comes to power. But in these councils, that will be put to the test, wouldn't it? Because I mean, politics is a very corrupt and dirty thing in Britain and most places. Council politics is real. It's like a gutter of dirty politics. and they will be. I mean, there's so full of such a snake's nest of corruption and nepotism and all sorts of stuff. So they will probably be. There will be attempts at discrediting them, and they will be discredited. But
I think not. I mean, the councils
Maybe
in
not so
Britain
much
are
as-
so they're really quite powerless. They have certain powers of
Yeah.
planning and things like that, but in other times they get their budget set. And the people, I think, they will be looking mainly at what Farage does in Westminster, like in Parliament. That's going to be the decisive question.
yeah,
But I'm sure they will discredit himself in some of these places. They've just been elected now,
Yeah.
right? And they will face, I think there is in one of them, I can't remember which one, there's already a brewing dispute with the union. And so obviously this will, well, really put them to the test and obviously expose, you say the contradictions. It will expose the contradictions between like
What
the wing
people-
which wants to lean a little bit towards the working class and the traditional bourgeois wing, which is very much part of his coalition as well.
Yeah.
But I think he can also, if you think about what's going on with the Labour government and so on, he'll be able to ride out. I think it won't have a major impact on his performance in the elections.
Yeah. For now, he's definitely advancing. And yes, we should also say there's not a firm unitary block of working class people behind it. It's like a Trump movement in many ways.
Yeah.
It reflects a lot of disgruntled layers. Part of them is there's a section of the ruling class, the junior wings of the ruling class, if you may.
Yeah.
Then you have a section of the petit bourgeois, the middle class, estate agents, the small companies who are under the pressure of big business and under the pressure of regulations and the laws that big business have made in their favor. Then you have an important segment of the working class. And then you have a part of the lumpens. Someone was saying this is a coalition, an uneasy coalition of those who get up at 7 a.m. and hate those who don't, and those who don't. Those who get up at 7 a.m. and go to work and hate those who don't, and those who don't.
Yeah.
But obviously it's a bit broader than that. And these obviously are pulling in different directions. Farage himself is firmly on the side of big business, his own business and capital. He's a bourgeois. He's a reactionary bourgeois. He's been using this anti-immigration talk to divert the attention from the real cuts and attacks against the living standards. He was played up. You were saying this. He was played up by the British establishment themselves.
Yeah, for years.
For years, the BBC, all the other establishments.
When no left-winger ever got to go on Question Time,
Yeah.
right, which is this flagship TV show of the BBC,
Yeah.
where you put politicians and some celebrities,
Yeah.
and you put them on, and the audience gets to ask them questions, right?
Yeah.
An audience which has been revealed many times to be a stitch up by the BBC.
Yeah.
But anyway, and he frequently got invited to that, even before he had any MPs
Yeah.
or MEPs or anything, and he would
Yeah.
frequently get invited there. Whereas, we've never been invited to Question Time.
Yeah.
I don't think any Jeremy Corbyn, before he became leader of the Labour Party, was ever invited there, and so on, right? It's clearly...
Yeah.
It's basically that program is a stitch up, and the fact that they put him on there so frequently, also before him, they put on this horrible, even more right wing guy, Nick Griffiths, I think, at one point, and so on. So they promote these guys, even if they don't have. They would say, "Oh no, it's because he represents something in society," but it's not true.
No.
They would promote these guys over things, people like Corbyn, or even more us, right, who have a different.
They was promoted back then where they weren't a real danger to the system and the establishment. They would promote them as a convenient distraction, a convenient way of distracting attention of people to things such as immigration.
And I think also, like, Labour Party cynically used Farage for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think they had the idea of doing something similar now.
Yeah.
which is because Tony Blair, he basically hemorrhaged support like nothing else after 2001, the election of 2001. After that election, he started hemorrhaging support. But he stayed in power, or the Labour stayed in power until 2008.
Yeah.
2 more elections, and that was on the basis of, was it 2010 they stayed in? Anyway, it doesn't matter too much. It's 2010 they stayed in government. And it was on the basis of they were losing support, but it was to UKIP, which was Farage's party at that time, right? And the Conservatives were also losing some votes to UKIP. So even if they were losing a lot and lots, millions of votes, they weren't actually losing the seats in the elections. And they were also very pleased with themselves because, no, we know how to deal with elections and so on. And they said this thing in the last election when people pointed out that they've lost votes compared to Jeremy Corbyn. They were like, no, but we understand how to win elections, right?
Yeah.
And basically what they were doing was leaning on Farage and Farage's party as a means of like splitting the vote, right? Yeah. And now obviously now they're going to go so strong. This is not going to be, they're not going to be splitting the vote anymore. Most likely, but rather be
the absorbent, be the opposition pole.
Yeah,
exactly. Now, when you talk with left-wing people or you hear about the left, not that it is anything significant in British politics at the moment, but there is this frantic, desperate idea that the far right is rising, that Nigel Farage represents as a mortal threat almost to democracy, to the working class. This is what we've seen. This is also what we saw when Trump was elected. And I have to say, when I was preparing for this episode and I was reading some of this material, I was fuming at the left and at the guts they have to say things like that when they are the ones who are responsible for this situation. Why is it that the idea of nationalization is left for Nigel Farage to put forward in such a forceful manner as he is? Jeremy Corbyn did put it forward, which is when he was rising. But even then, I was looking at on your prompting, I was looking at some interviews with him, and he was attacked by the bourgeois. They were saying, "Oh, this is anti-business." And the CBI, the Chamber of was a business, and anyway, the Bosses Association, head of the Bosses Association, was saying, "Oh, this is bad for business. This is anti-business politics," and Corbyn went out of his way to go out there and explain, "No, this is good for business. This is actually good for business. This is very normal. This is the most rational thing to do is to nationalize." In other words, he was trying to be statesmanlike. He was trying to fit his socialist left-wing politics, which were correct. The ideas of nationalizing the utilities and the railways were absolutely correct, and we supported it. But at every turn, the left has played the statesman, professional politician, that card. And they've therefore blended in with the establishment, which is hated. And here you see how it should be done. Not demagogically, but proper. I mean, Farage is a demagogue. But the way that he does it, the shareholders of Thames Water, they don't deserve to be saved. They deserve to be left to rot. British Steel, nationalize it. Big strike in Birmingham, we'll go over there and show our support to the whole city, including the strikers. In other words, and he's called himself an anti-establishment figure. In other words, every time he's attacked, he goes on the offensive, which is similar to the way that Trump acted. But the field has been left to these guys because the left has not been doing it. That's why the stage has been...
I mean, it's like when Jeremy Corbyn was rising, when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge of the Labour Party, the left was in charge of the Labour Party, there wasn't much room. I mean, there was two sides to that. There was obviously the fact that the Conservatives at that time was led by Boris Johnson, who was sucking in all the Leave voters, who was some part of the Farage's basis, the Leave voters, the people who opposed the European Union. And so he was taking in some of that, and Conservatives got the highest percentage vote for a long time. But anyway, but the other side was, and the other side of Farage's problem at that time was that Labour was taking in a lot of these votes, particularly in 2017, right?
Yeah.
That people who are angry, people wanted a different solution, people were wanting a way forward. Well, there was something there with Labour's manifesto, which promised to do things in a different way, right?
We're talking about nationalization.
Ending the austerity, ending the cuts, and so on, giving workers a better deal, restoring trade union rights, all this stuff. But as you say, the problem was they conceived of this not as being part of a struggle against the bosses, or at least not publicly. They didn't say that. They didn't see it as part of a struggle, but actually, no, you can wed the interest of the CBI, the rotten bosses association. You can wed that to the interest of the working class.
Yeah.
And alongside that as well, you can combine the program of Jeremy Corbyn and the manifesto of Jeremy Corbyn. You can combine that with the right wing of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
Which you cannot. And which was
who
proven.
are also the agents of the bosses.
Precisely. The bosses and their agents inside the Labour Party, right? And proven for the whole of the Jeremy Corbyn period, you cannot coexist with these people, but they refused to deal with them. They refused. They should have, one way or another, they should have been out.
Yeah.
I think, to be honest, just removing a few of them from the seats as MPs, one way or another, like Starmer did with the left.
Yeah.
Like Boris Johnson threatened to do with the liberals, if you will, in the Tory party. If that had been done, you've probably gotten rid of the whole of the right. We lost quite a lot of the right during those years anyway, and then came back in again. But if that had been done, then the Labour Party would have been the party that could have challenged all this stuff that Nigel Farage is now saying. They could have provided an outlet for this anger and discontent in society.
Exactly.
But because they didn't, this is where we end up.
This is the vacuum we're at. And the state of the left today, I mean, again, as I said, the guts they have to complain. We have something called Stand Up to Racism.
Yeah.
In, what's it called? In Runcorn, they organized. First of all, Stand Up to Racism is an anti-reform organization. This is a left-wing, so-called left-wing organization, which is campaigning against Reform UK. This is at a time where the government is carrying out some of the most vicious cuts in recent history. The working class has never been more under pressure by the bosses and by the bosses' political representatives in the Tories and the top of the Labour Party. And these guys focus on someone who's not even in power, who doesn't, I mean, they're reactionary. The Reform Party as a whole is a reactionary party, not the voters, not all of the voters. The party is, but they're not even in power. The other guys are attacking the working class, the workers. There's this fuming anger, and these guys organize a campaign against reform. The idea being what? Anyone but reform. Vote anyone but reform.
Yeah.
Which means what? Which means
conservatives,
liberals,
Labour, right-wing Labour, Greens, whatever. Whatever.
It's complete madness. It's complete madness. And they have the guts to come in again and say, oh dear, why is reform? We can't understand why reform. This is why reform is under. This is the same class collaboration that the left did before. This is class collaboration.
Yeah.
Now, this has been supported by.
But it's like you have the like the very reason. I mean, there is a statement here by them, right? I got it here in front of me, and you can see that they recognize some of this, right? But they drew none of the conclusions, right? They say like, oh yeah, this, like, there's a tax, Labour government's carrying out the tax, and that's a bad thing. They say that, but I mean, it's left at that level. They don't draw the conclusions, right? Yeah. So obviously, what is needed is a program that can answer to the needs of working class people.
Yeah.
But they don't provide that. Instead, they say, no, go vote Conservative.
Yeah.
which are the very people, or even Labour, the very people who created the conditions for reform to rise. Now vote for them.
Yeah.
I mean, how is that solving anything?
Yeah.
I can understand that some people are, because reform, there's some really racist stuff coming out of the mouth of Nigel Farage and other, even more so, maybe some of them have some really, some of them even have a fascist background and so on. I can say where people are worried and concerned. They don't want these people in power. Yeah. And I don't want them in power. They're reactionary and they're going to be introduced. If they come into government, they're sure they will ratchet up all the racist stuff and so on. That there will be, they will provide wind in the sail for the racists and so on. But the question, like, there will be a lot more racist attacks, on the streets and so on. They will provide an outlet. They will give those people courage to go out and do those kind of things, right? Like we saw in the August. Sure, that will be the consequence. But the question is, how do we stop that from happening? Can we stop it from happening by basically go and vote for all the same people who create the social conditions for reform to rise? Is that our solution to the problem? And that is basically what they're saying. Because if you look at it, and they're like, well, they say, yeah, we need to vote for these people. And then they say, oh no, we also call on the government to reverse the anti-migrant policies, right?
Yeah. And
that's all they have to say.
Let's see the signatories. Number 1, Diane Abbott, the head of the left of the Labour Party. This is she's been out in the last few days. You told me she's been making some noise against. It's very meek noises that she's been making. She's been saying what any 6-year-old can see. We're losing votes because we're cutting and we're attacking working class people. Wow, that is a revolutionary thing. Belle Ribeiro Addy, another MP. Daniel Kebede, the National Education Union General Secretary of PCS, ASLEF General Secretary, Bakers and Food Allied Workers Union General Secretary, TUC LGBT Committee, Stand Up to Race. I mean, it's just, these are the so-called leaders of the working class. And instead of the left of the working class, and instead of putting forward a class position that would actually fight, that would actually undermine reform, what they're actually doing is lesser evilism. They're actually saying, no, what the reform represents a more reactionary organization, a political line than what we have now.
Yeah,
which is not true actually. If anything, the policies that we've seen, they're to the left of the of the Labour Party. They represent capitalist interests, and that's it. But
also you can see, I mean, the other thing is obviously all of what the Labour government has been doing ever since they came into power is to push exactly in the directions of more racism. And I mean, these very organizations, they recognize that the riots in August were partly because of the Labour government and the statements made by the Labour government. They are inflaming all these tensions themselves. Yeah. These people, they want you to vote for Kami Badenoch, who says a lot of this stuff herself. Keir Starmer and his government, who says a lot of the same racist stuff as Nigel Farage does. And they want you to vote for them instead of the other guy who might say it a little bit more, but it's not a fundamental difference.
But there's a smoking gun here, which is even more interesting. Mm-hmm. I mean, it would be comedic if it wasn't so tragic. Karen Shaw, the Labour candidate for Runcorn and Helsby, that's the one who just lost by 6 votes. Yeah. In this constituency, Stand Up to Racism organized a meeting with Karen Shaw. And they basically threw their weight behind Karen Shaw. Now, Karen Shaw organized a petition to close a local asylum hotel. She's just as racist as these guys are supposed to be. Stand up to racism. Yeah. And they organized with someone who's carried out these racist policies.
So when people go like, well, what you're saying doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I mean, why are you calling Nigel Farage a racist? Why are you calling him like against democracy or whatever they throw at him, when these other guys, they're saying the same thing. Yeah. And then people, they have a point.
Yeah. The point, what we can learn from this, you see, you should never be too proud to learn from your enemies. Nigel Farage is an enemy of the working class. but he's showing us something. He's showing us the extreme anger and resentment, the insurrectionary anger, the revolutionary anger that's lying there latent underneath the surface of society, and how you can actually tap into it. He's just using it here and there. He doesn't want to set up. He's very, how do you say, trying cleverly to balance, not to encourage too much and not to be too, but at the same time, he does say things which hit right in the middle of what ordinary working class people are feeling. A revolutionary anti-mood against the elite, against the establishment. And that is what the left should be doing. But instead what we have, again, we've said this many times on this show, in the moment of truth, where capitalism is in its deepest crisis. You know, when I got politically active, I remember people were saying, "Oh, yeah, it's all good. Communism is good, but it's never. People are never gonna move. People don't ever want to move. The capitalists are too powerful. The system, people are too rich. The media has too much power." Well, okay, we're now 16 years later, and the system is in a terminal crisis and decline. The economy is only going one way. Living standards are collapsing. The media is totally discredited. The establishment, the political establishment, is totally discredited. The bosses are hated. People are willing to move. People are ready to move. People are angry. They're just looking for an outlet. And still, the goddamn lefts are clinging on to this system, trying to play their statesmen like, you know, games.
So the same people, they've now launched, well, not exactly the same people, but very similar people, list of people. They've launched a new initiative called We Demand Change. Yeah. Which I must say, just the title is leaves something to be desired. It's actually very similar to the language that Keir Starmer is using, talking about change over time. Anyway,
time for change.
But no content to it, right? Very similar group of people, and they had a statement which they put out, and just the headlines gives you an idea of, like, you know, there's this mood that you're talking about, the revolution. There is anger out in society. People are, yes, they are demanding change, yeah, but they are looking for something. They're looking for an alternative, right? A clear alternative, and there is all this potential, actually, because of the crisis of capitalism. There is also this potential, right, to prepare the overthrow of capitalism, right? To prepare a struggle against capitalism, maybe struggle against the bosses, and those conditions are there, and you can see it. I mean, the Birmingham bean workers show it, if nothing else, you know. But what they put as the headlines of their statement, which is like, I mean, this is kind of like a preparation of the launching of a political party, I guess, And the headlines are "Turning the Tide on Despair." Yeah.
Just stop despairing so much.
Yeah, well, we need to stop. And then the other headline is "Organize for Hope, Not Despair."
My God.
And then they have a program which does include opposition to the cuts and so on. Doesn't mention nationalization. Yeah. Doesn't mention socialism. Neither does this statement. Yeah, there are things about somewhere here you can talk. There is a mention of workers. Yeah, but it barely mentions working class. It doesn't mention socialism. Doesn't mention nationalizations. In fact, it's a step backwards compared to the Labour manifestos of 2019 and 2017. It's weaker than those. No doubt, because they are hoping to integrate all kinds of people into their coalition who are not socialists and so on. And so they're watering down. In this particular moment when what we need is clarity, we need bold, radical ideas. These guys are watering down their ideas, making them more wishy-washy, less clear, more class collaborationist, and so on. When what we need is the exact opposite.
Yes, we need a revolutionary alternative. Just, I mean, we don't have time to really go into it, but we've talked about this in relation to the US as well. The betrayal of Sanders was a direct forerunner of the rise of Trump.
Yeah.
The left abandoning the stage, clinging onto the system, creates the space for populists such as Trump, such as Farage, such as Le Pen, such as the AfD in Germany to come forward. In Germany, we've seen the rise of the AfD, which is now the second party. And you have, in the past weeks, there's been quite a lot happening. On the one hand, you've seen the intelligence agency writing a report basically trying to ban the AFD. Let me just see the expression they use. They classify it as an extremist organization, basically a fascist organization is what they're trying to say.
That's a legal question.
It's a legal question. They're trying to ban it, just like they used a legal case to stop Le Pen from standing, just like they used the courts to attack Trump, although they couldn't stop him in the end.
Yeah.
This so-called lawfare. This is bourgeois democracy. Just like in Romania, they banned Georgescu. But although it's interesting, in Romania, we just had the first round of the new elections, and the candidate that Georgescu supported got 40% of the vote. Although it's not Georgescu, but it shows you that you can't ban your way out of these things. But nevertheless, there's been an attempt in the AFD. We'll see where it goes. Maybe it might or might not happen. There's been talk about it in parliament. Last year already, more than 100 MPs signed a petition by an SPD member of the parliament to ban the AFD. While all of this is happening, Die Linke, first of all, let's just say the AFD represents or gets the votes of a significant part of the German working class, an industrial working class. And what's happening here is that they are being disenfranchised. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
That's what they're attempting to do.
Yeah.
And where is the left in this discussion?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, all this lawfare stuff, right? I mean, this is stuff that you've used against the left time and time again.
Yeah.
And my local MP, just around the corner,
Yeah.
we were talking about the former mayor of Tower Hamlets.
Yeah.
He was using that against my local MP, Absana Begum, and he was dragging her to court.
She was a leftist.
She was left-wing, yes.
Yeah.
That's right, the Corbyn supporter. And he was dragging her to court over some stupid thing. She was eventually acquitted, but not before a name was dragged through the mud. This is the way that they use the courts against the left. And the state, basically, is using its state against the left. And I think this is the way they're now using it against the right? Yeah. And why on earth are people on the left thinking that this is the way forward? This is a curb. I mean, look, we are not defenders of, we are not promoters of bourgeois democracy. We don't fight for bourgeois democracy because we fight for a higher form of democracy. Yeah.
But we are still the most consistent defenders of bourgeois democracy. And the liberal establishment, the liberal bourgeois, who claim to be the upholders of all of these democratic rights and principles, are the ones that are attacking it. The left should be denouncing this. That's how you can actually, but with the left ganging up together with the establishment, they tarnish they basically tarnish their own, image. And as you say, this is going to be something that's going to be used against the left,
no doubt,
a few years down the line, right?
But also, like, the way you fight these guys is politically.
Yes.
You need a political program. You need to win over workers, right? With a political program, you can't basically circumvent the whole question of trying to win and convince people of your ideas. You can't do that by simply lining up together with the wing of the ruling class to try to block these people from standing in
That's
election.
the whole point of democracy.
Yeah.
But obviously the point is, they don't have the arguments, perhaps. Now,
but they don't have that program. That's the thing.
The problem is they don't have the program. Their program, increasingly, is linked to the bourgeois. At the same time, while this is happening, while the AFD is allowed to stand out as the only opposition party, it in fact gets like a revolutionary, image in some people's eyes, perhaps even by being. Being persecuted and being hounded down by the state.
They talk about the firewall, right?
Yeah, and they have this firewall within all of the so-called democratic parties are lining up together. Then you have a situation where Friedrich Merz, the chancellor now, is supposed to be elected by parliament on Tuesday, and they couldn't get the votes in.
His own party probably didn't vote for him.
His own party, the coalition has 328 deputies, right? So that's the CDU and the SPD together have 328 deputies. They needed 316 votes. They only got 310. So 18 deputies did not vote for Merz. This was in the morning. Now, they wanted to redo a vote immediately, but I don't know the exact rules of parliamentary.
They needed 2/3 in order to redo the vote.
Well, otherwise they had to wait until Friday.
Yeah.
They needed to change the rules. For that, they needed 2/3 majority. And they got that support amongst other places from Die Linke.
Yeah.
The so-called left.
Yeah.
The so-called left. Die Linke is now saying, oh, it's because otherwise we would have a vote on Friday, and Friday was the day of our conference, and we can't have the conference at the same time. And it was just a logistical, technical argument. Whereas the AfD has come out saying, well, let's just have new elections then.
Yeah.
Surely that's what Die Linke should have done as well.
Yeah.
Instead of support. They say, oh, it's just 3 days. But as the Jacobin actually pointed out, the German Jacobin, they said, well, in those were 3 important days because you already have a crisis in the coalition. You could have used those 3 days to increase that crisis, to attack the ruling class, to attack the government, to attack the coming government, and gain political points, perhaps even to have brought down the whole thing and have new elections again, where you would stand stronger. Instead, what they did was aligned with the establishment parties against the AfD.
And I think she even made a statement about it.
Yes, Ines Schwertner, who's party leader of the Left Party, has called on the CDU and SU, this is the right wing, this is the conservatives, to involve her party more closely in political decisions. This is a quote. I expect the CDU-CSU to speak up not only when the house is on fire. This is a Google Translate, so they probably means call us up because they called them up. But also in other political decisions when a 2/3 majority is necessary, i.e. when you don't have the 2/3 majority, we can provide it to you.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. They're putting themselves at the service of the most reactionary bourgeois. This is what Schwertner told the Redaktionsnetzwerk Deutschland, which is, I don't know what it is. And then she said, democratic parties should be able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Again, the same kind of class collaboration. Democratic parties, the same parties has been trying to disenfranchise a large part of the electorate. The left throws their lot in with these guys. And then they complain about the rise of the far right.
Yeah.
I think we can end the episode here. We can end everything here. This is all people need to know.
No answers to the burning questions that German workers are facing of today. Give them no answers. I mean, no coherent answers to those questions.
Yeah.
And instead just line up with the Conservative Party and the Social Democrats, are the ones who've been basically putting the German workers in the position where they are today.
Yeah.
Which is, with the bosses who are attacking the workers, squeezing their wages and so on. Yeah. That's what they're telling us to do. And on that basis, there's no way you can fight these organizations. There's no way you can fight for socialism.
Yeah, precisely. What is needed, I think we need to also bring a bit of perspective. What we're seeing now is a snapshot. This is where the development of class struggle so far has led us to this place. What is the actual situation? Let's take a step back. You have an establishment, a political system, and a ruling class which is totally discredited. It has very little actual active support in society compared to where it stood historically. It's in the deepest crisis of its history.
Yeah.
On every level, economically, diplomatically, militarily, in every way, it's in a crisis. You have a working class which is fuming, which is under enormous inhuman pressures, which is angry, which is bursting, ready to explode. If it had a focal point, a vehicle to express itself through. The parties and organizations and leaders who are supposed to be their these vehicles,
Yeah.
their mouthpieces, have all aligned themselves with the old establishment. And therefore, you have an enormous vacuum, which allows organizations like Reform UK, people like Nigel Farage, people like Trump, people like the AFD, who are bourgeois, but who speak the language of the workers, who appeal to their class sentiments, and obviously then mix those up with reactionary ideas such as racism and so on, but fundamentally base themselves on the class anger that exists in society. These people are allowed to establish themselves, but that's not the end of the story, obviously, because what you're going to have is, yes, they will come to power one way or another. A lot of these will come to power, if not all of them, and they will be left with the same capitalist system that they have to manage, which is in a deep crisis. And they will create cuts. They will make cuts, and they will attack the workers, and they will not be able to satisfy the hopes and aspirations of the workers.
No.
And there are a lot of hopes. And therefore, the same kind of jubilant festival atmosphere that we saw with the election of Trump amongst certain layers of the working class in Britain, and that we might see when Reform gets elected or other, the same mood will turn into massive anger. And again, a vacuum. The question will be posed. A vacuum will be there to be solved. We just had a conference of the British Revolutionary Communist Party, the British organization of the Revolutionary Communist International. It's a fantastic congress. You can read the report on our website. But a lot of comrades I spoke with in places like Hull, Swansea, other places, they were saying anger is rife, and the people who vote Reform are extremely radical. It's true that they're not communists. They're not communist revolutionaries. But more than anything, that's because we are not big enough to be heard by these people.
Yeah.
But they're very, very open to ideas such as ours. Comrades was a taxi driver, says people come into the cab. First thing they say is, oh, thank God you're not an immigrant. Little do they know he's Polish. But anyway, within 10 minutes, he said, they've talked themselves out of their anti-immigrant position and into a class position of hating the ruling class, hating the rich, hating the established, hating all of the parties. They don't even their support for reform is superficial.
Yeah, I mean, you could see it at the rally, right?
Yeah.
The response, this is Reform pro-Farage rally.
In Birmingham, you mean?
In Birmingham, yeah. And I think you can see it there. This is quite shallow, and it's completely... they're only able to fill this vacuum because there is nothing on the left.
Yeah.
I mean, we've just released this book. I'm going to do a bit of a shameless plug. We just released this book about the 1930s, right?
Yes.
Now, these Farage and so on, Trump, they're not fascists. They're not a Hitler.
No.
They're not about to put communists and socialists in concentration camps or smash up the trade unions. This is not on their program. And you can, if you think about it for 2 seconds, you can realize that there is a difference. But the left is making precisely the same mistakes now as they did then. And Trotsky was tearing his hair out about how the left, the Communist Party in particular, because they were meant to stand for something different, and the Social Democratic parties, how they were basically opening the way by not fighting for socialism, by not taking up a struggle for workers, and then just lining themselves up with the ruling class,
Yes.
and trying to keep the liberals, radicals in France, as they were known, keeping them afloat. They completely doomed themselves.
Yes.
And handed the French workers with their hands tied behind their back over to, eventually hand them over to Hitler. And this is now, obviously, the stakes aren't as high because these guys aren't fascist, but precisely the same political mistakes are being repeated again. That is, we don't fight for our own program, we don't fight for our own idea, we don't fight for the working class. Instead, we try to support or keep the bourgeois in power, basically.
Yes.
And cling on to the establishment, which is hated and loathed by working class people.
Yes. The main enemy, that is where you should aim our guns at. And the main enemy is in the boardrooms, is in the stock market, it's big business, it's the commanding heights of the economy, it's the political establishment that represents these people. These guys are sideshows compared to the main enemy. And if you aim your guns at the main enemy on a class-based revolutionary program, these guys will also disappear. That's what we saw with Corbyn. Because as soon as he started talking radical talk, UKIP disappeared. They went down significantly in the polls. That is the way of fighting reform and Trump and all of these guys, by a revolutionary class position aimed at the main enemies who are the ones in power, who are the ones who are standing on the main levers of power in the state, in the economy, and so on and so forth. And that's what we're building, the Revolutionary Communist International. We're not just talk, we're not just a podcast. We actually put action behind our words, and we are building that alternative that doesn't exist today. We're not big enough to fill that vacuum, but we are asking and we're appealing to all our listeners and viewers. If you agree with these ideas, if you feel the sense of the urgency that most of us feel in building for a revolutionary alternative, to be able to lead the working class in the struggle against the capitalist system, then join us now and prepare for the coming waves of class struggle, because they're coming. The problems that are there in Britain and America and Germany and everywhere else, the pressures on the working class, the hatred, the anger is not going to disappear. It's only going to get worse. And sooner or later, it will get a revolutionary expression itself, even though that's not perhaps the case at this particular moment. It's a distorted reflection of that. And for that time, we need to have revolutionary communist parties ready in every country, able to intervene and fight for the lead in that, so it doesn't fall in the hands of reactionaries.
Yes. Very true.
I think, is that the last words? Am I getting the last words today? Or do you have any final?
No, I can't but agree with you. I mean, the future of humanity lies basically in our hands, right? I'm not talking about you and me, but in the hands of all those young people who are struggling and want to change society. It's up to them to get organized. I would say join us, but to get organized and fight for a different kind of society, fight for socialism, fight for the working class.
Yes, absolutely. With those words, we're going to end it today. We've already spoken too long. It's always the case with you and me. It's such a good conversation. We'll be back again next Thursday at 6 p.m. UK time. Don't forget, please, to like, subscribe, share, send these episodes to anyone you think might find them interesting. Help us get the word out. Thank you very much.